Hi, Jonathan York Bay Financial Partners, looking at investment markets. Again, another very strong number out of the US on the jobs side. Non-farm payrolls came in at 336,000 for the month. That was versus an expectation of around 170,000. So while that was still a very strong number and indicates, still a pretty hot jobs market, interesting Audi earnings were actually down a little bit at 4.2 versus 4.3. Now this week will be very interesting to see what comes out from the Fed minutes. Really quite a sort of difficult decision for the Fed going forward. Certainly inflation is falling, probably a little bit higher than they sort of would like, but the path is clearly downward at present. Obviously, the big uncertainty there is oil, which had spiked back up to around sort of $95 a barrel, but again, sort of quite interesting over the last sort of week or so. That's come down by just over 10% now and trading in sort of mid-80s. Now, obviously, the other big news out there is the conflict in the Middle East between Israel and Hamas on the Gaza Strip. Sort of spiked a little bit higher, but it's now sort of come back. Interest rates and the sort of equities in the US, interest rates traded higher, equities traded down, but again, quite a sharp reversal now. Ten years backed off to 465, and the 2 years backed off below 5% at 497. Equities also up quite strongly as well. So, potentially, obviously, as we head into sort of earnings season as well now, is a year-end rally still on the cards? Also, as well, the IMF has upgraded the US growth. They've revised that up by 0.3 to 2.1 for the next sort of 12 months. Again, that's sort of quite interesting because, potentially that sort of takes recession as well, sort of further off the table. Interesting, the US mortgage market, though, is sort of nudging up. That 30-year rate has now hit its highest level since 2000. Now, 30-year mortgage in the US is currently around 775. But what this conflict in the Middle East does do is sort of heightens the need for the US to sort out their speaker as well. And potentially that could sort of force the Republicans into coming up with a decision sort of sooner rather than later. Also, as well, Xi Jinping has met with US officials and sort of stressed the need for sort of coexistence and really sort of trying to smooth the ways and trying to get that relationship back on track. Because certainly signs that the Chinese economy is starting to sort of recover out there. The recent sort of Golden Week holiday there, really quite increased sort of spending and travel. And obviously, if that is the case, the Chinese economy recovering, that should be good for the global economy as well. Now, I sort of mentioned oil sort of backed off quite aggressively. It was well above $90, sort of trading around sort of $95 a barrel. People were talking about $100 before Christmas. But that has seen sort of quite a sharp sort of fall now and currently trading around sort of $85 a barrel. Now in the UK, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak's under a little bit of pressure there, sort of delivered his sort of speech at the Tory party conference. But again, there was sort of murmurings of unrest, potentially, there is even talk about a potential sort of leadership challenge in the next sort of 6 to 9 months. Interesting, and one of the most supported sort of speeches on the sort of sidelines was ex-Prime Minister Liz Truss. Now, also expected to see the ECB minutes this week, and again, ECB members coming out and sort of talking about potentially sort of further rate hikes are on the cards if inflation doesn't come down. But against that backdrop, you saw some pretty weak retail sales, down 1.2 for the month of August. Which does sort of raise the question still about, the potential sort of targets that central banks are setting for inflation. Are they realistic now? Now in Australia, obviously the first meeting there with the new governor, what they did leave the cash rate unchanged at 4.1%. The next meeting is early November on Melbourne Cup Day. And will they be looking to increase rates then? Certainly the Australian economy is pushing on at a pretty good rate. Sort of signs the housing market is starting to recover. Certainly the migration figures are pretty good. And as well, if China is starting to recover and starting to show a little bit of growth out there, that will be obviously good for the sort of minerals and resources coming out of the Australian. Now here in New Zealand, really all about the election. Now that's coming up this Saturday. At present, it's still looking a very sort of close race, with National and ACT looking like they are potentially sort of 1 or 2 seats short of being able to form a government. But we're still around 10% of voters are undecided. That could sort of change on the day. Now, what will be interesting is that the following week we then see the latest CPI data. And then a Reserve Bank meeting in November. If that CPI data is still sort of showing a fall out there, you would expect the Reserve Bank to still be on hold. Interesting, starting to see potentially a few sort of green shoots coming through in the housing market, activity starting to pick up, and price activity starting to sort of nudge up slightly as well. But as with most markets, the New Zealand equity market will really take its lead from the US sort of earnings season. And, sort of going into that, equity prices have been knocked down quite a bit over the last sort of 2 to 3 weeks. So it'll just be very interesting to see how that sort of transpires. So if you are looking for income options, go to the website www.bayfinancialpartners.co.nz for lots of interesting articles, and we look forward to speaking to you soon.